Hey, I'm Christian. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, so a little housekeeping first, I guess. I've been gone for a little while. I had some family come into town, and I don't really want to do this when there's other people in the house. It's kind of weird enough when it's just me. So I took a break, but I am back. I guess I should start this off by saying that I have a bit of a complicated history with classics. I'm like most people. I would imagine I was introduced to, the typical ones in school. Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, the typical ones that they always make you read, and it makes you hate them. I really wanted to like Wuthering Heights. I was disappointed that I didn't like Wuthering Heights. I actually have bought it recently and tried to read it again recently, and I just still could not get into it. And so I feel like it kind of put me off of classics for a while. Especially when I was young, reading them, I felt like I was missing something. And when you're young, you're kind of always looking for an excuse to think you're stupid anyway. And so I just didn't get it. And so that kind of put me off of all classics. I didn't like Pride and Prejudice. I'm sure there was other ones I tried to read and I just couldn't get into. But now that I'm older, arguably wiser, I wanted to give it another go. So I decided to start the journey with this one. It's A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Unlike the other ones I just mentioned, I actually really, really like this book. So if you're kind of have a spotty history with classics like I do, and you've been avoiding them, I definitely recommend checking out this one. So before I go too deep into it, I'll just give you a synopsis in case you have no idea what it's about. So the story follows a young girl named Lucy Honeychurch. She's young. It's either late teens or early 20s. They don't ever really specify, but she's young. And she is a middle-class British girl, and in the 1900s, early 1900s. So there's a lot of expectations around her, about the way she should behave, the way she should live her life. Pretty much every aspect of her life there's expectations for. So she starts off, I would say, very naive, very measured, very aware of herself and what's expected of her and all of the people around her. And what kind of throws her life off kilter is she goes on vacation to Italy, which, as I understand it, is something that all the upper middle class British people used to do. And she goes with her older cousin, Charlotte Bartlett, who is very much about keeping up appearances and what's proper and what's improper. And they come into contact with a man named Mr. Emerson and his son George. And the way that comes about is the boarding house that they are staying in, Mrs. Bartlett, the cousin, is very upset that they've been given a room that doesn't have a view, which, that's where the name of the book comes from. And this man, Mr. Emerson, offers the ladies his room because his room and his son's room is a room with a view. And Mrs. Bartlett is scandalized by this because she can't imagine staying in a room where a man has been, and she finds the very idea improper. She thinks he is very improper for even bringing it up and offering it. Lucy, from the very beginning, seems very intrigued by Mr. Emerson and George, and throughout their time in Italy, she runs into them. They have encounters, and she starts to appreciate the way that they live life. They live their life very much not caring what other people think and what other people want from them. They're all about seeking what makes you happy and seeking freedom. And Lucy's very intrigued by this, and despite her cousin's feelings about it, she seeks it out and starts to sort of think about her own life and think about people's expectations of her, and if those expectations match up to what she wants for herself. So this story is often touted as a love story, which I think maybe is why when I was looking up reviews of it, some people didn't really care for it, because it's not what we think of as a love story today. There's no spice, as it's called now. There's absolutely none of that. The hottest things get is she gets a kiss, which is total scandal when it happens. So, inevitably, spoiler alert, she falls in love with George. But, as typical in novels of this time period, she's supposed to marry someone else, someone who is very high status, someone her family would approve of, someone she could have a very typical, very predictable life with. And because she's met George and Mr. Emerson, she battles with herself. She knows she doesn't really want that life anymore, but she still feels like she has to pursue it because of her family. So I think at the end of the day, I would more say that this is a novel about self-discovery, about taking charge of your own life, deciding what you want for yourself instead of letting others decide for you. A lot of modern day readers might not be very happy with it, because instead of seeking what we think of to be freedom now, which would be going out on our own, having adventures, deciding to stay single, maybe dating around. Obviously, it's early 1900s Britain, so she decides instead to marry George, and the two of them presumably are going to have a free, very unpredictable life together. So in a way, she chooses freedom. She just chooses to have that freedom with someone else, which I actually found to be sweet. But if you're looking for spice and, trembling hands and all that stuff, throbbing places, there's none of that. But I still found it to be very sweet. Emerson has a very interesting writing style. He doesn't waste any of the page. You don't get a whole lot of flowery descriptions, which I really liked. I'm not really a fan of entire paragraphs. I don't need to know every detail of, what the sky looked like and how many clouds there are, and that type of writing is not for me. And at times it's almost conversational. There's certain points where he actually switches into second person. So he's like, you know this, or you see that. And I found that to be interesting. When you're learning to write and you're taking courses about writing, they'll tell you not to do that because it takes the reader out of the story and it can be very disjointing. But I actually thought that he did it very well. It kind of made me feel like I was a part of the story, which I enjoyed. But we're not all Forster, so I see why they tell writers that. Another thing that Forster does is we don't get a huge amount of scenes with Lucy and George. And as I said, some reviewers were actually frustrated about that because they didn't get a good sense of the sexual tension. But I actually thought that the less is more approach really worked well here because it kept me intrigued by George. I wanted to know more about him because we only get bits and pieces of like his philosophy and how he lives his life and what he feels. And I felt like it worked here because that's what Lucy was also feeling. Because of her expectations for her, she had to keep herself away from him. Even though she didn't want to, she was only allowed to get bits and pieces, and so I felt like that was it was purposefully done by Forster. It wasn't that, you know, he was trying to keep us all in stitches and trying to be cruel. I think he was trying to give us a glimpse of kind of what Lucy was dealing with. You know, she wanted to know more about him. She wanted to have more experiences with him, just like we do when we read the story. So I think holding George back was a really good thing to do. I think it really, really worked for the story. And as I said, I think, you know, if you're looking for scenes full of sexual tension and all that, this is definitely not that. It's much more of a, she meets someone and she's intrigued by that someone, and we don't really get any more than she does. But I think, yeah, I really liked that he did that, and I didn't think that it took away from the story. I think that it added to the story. But I mean, that is a valid criticism. You don't get much of George in the story at all. You actually, I think there's more scenes that focus on his father than him. And some of the things that we learn about George, we actually learn through his father, not George. But yeah, for the purposes of this, I think it was an interesting choice that worked well. Even with my convoluted history with classics, I really enjoyed this. I'm definitely planning on reading more Forster. I really like the way that he weaves his stories. I really like the way that he gave bits and pieces of the character, and he didn't feel like he had to just flood me with them to make me love them. You know, there's a reason he's considered one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. So yeah, I definitely plan on reading more Forster, and if you have struggled with classics, if you felt like you got bogged down by them, if they were slow, uninteresting, I definitely recommend A Room with a View. So yeah, yeah, 5 stars, and I'm picky with my 5 stars, so I highly recommend it. So hopefully it won't be this long again before my next video. I really enjoy making videos. I really enjoy interacting with everybody. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. So thank you for watching. Leave some comments below about maybe your history with classics. Let me know if you've had a similar convoluted history with them like I have. Let me know if you've read this book, or if you've read any other Forster. Don't spoil them for me, but if you've read other Forsters and you want to recommend some to me, I'm all for that. Recommend them to me. Yeah, I don't think I've forgotten anything, so thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.